I need to be upfront with you about something that happened a few years ago. This isn't a story I made up, this is the absolute truth of how I dismantled a man's life after he tried to ruin mine. The mediator, a tired-looking woman named Carol with glasses perched on the end of her nose, sighed as she looked at the flimsy, coffee-stained document in her hand. We were sitting in a sterile, windowless room in the San Francisco Superior Court, the air thick with the smell of old paper and quiet desperation. Across the table, my ex-boyfriend, Julian, offered her a sad, apologetic smile as he adjusted his ill-fitting, polyester blazer. He looked up at me, his eyes, once the color of warm whiskey, now dull and empty as he said the words that shattered the last bit of hope I had. "I'm sorry, Elara," he whispered, his voice cracking just so. "I just don't have it. I have nothing." If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. Our story began, as many do in San Francisco, with a hopeful spark. I was a freelance graphic designer, finally making a name for myself, pulling in enough work to afford a small but sunny apartment in the Mission District. Julian was a dream. He was sharp, ambitious, and had this magnetic energy that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He said he was working his way up in the finance world, but it was a tough grind. He was an analyst at a small, boutique firm, he claimed, a place with a lot of potential but not a lot of cash flow. He was brilliant, but undervalued and underpaid. For 2 years, I believed him. I fell for the narrative of the struggling genius. When his car broke down, I drained my savings to get it fixed. When he needed a new laptop for his freelance consulting, I put it on my credit card. When he lost his apartment because of a sudden rent hike, he moved in with me, promising to contribute as soon as his big commission check came in. That check, of course, never materialized. He ate my food, used my electricity, and slept in my bed, all while spinning tales of his imminent success. The loans started small, a few hundred for groceries, 1,000 for a certification course that would double his income. The big one was $15,000. He said it was a bridge loan to cover his expenses while he closed a massive deal that would finally set them up. He'd pay me back with interest, he swore, his eyes wide and sincere. He even drafted a promissory note on a napkin one night at our favorite taqueria, a gesture that seemed charmingly earnest at the time. I was in love, and I was a fool. I transferred the money. The deal, predictably, fell through. A month later, he was gone. He left a note on the kitchen counter, a masterpiece of manipulative prose about how he couldn't keep dragging me down with him. He was a failure, he wrote, a burden. He was moving back in with his parents in Fresno to figure his life out. He'd pay me back every single penny, he promised, as soon as he got back on his feet. The note was so full of self-pity that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The pity evaporated when I saw he'd taken my spare MacBook and the expensive noise-canceling headphones I used for work. I spent the next 6 months in a spiraling financial crisis. His debt became my anchor, pulling me under. I took on extra projects, worked until 3 in the morning, and lived on ramen and coffee. My credit score plummeted. Every time I called him, his number went straight to voicemail. His emails bounced back. His social media was a ghost town. He had vanished. Finally, left with no other option, I filed a small claim suit. It felt like a desperate, pathetic move, but that $15,000 was the difference between keeping my apartment and being out on the street. Which led me to that suffocating mediation room. When he finally walked in, I barely recognized him. The tailored shirts and confident stride were gone, replaced by a cheap suit that hung off his frame and a practiced, weary slump in his shoulders. He looked defeated. He presented his evidence to Carol, the mediator, with a heavy heart. Bank statements showing a balance of $112. Pay stubs from a minimum wage job at a hardware store in Fresno. A letter from his parents, attesting that he was living in their basement, rent-free. It was a perfect, airtight portrait of a man utterly broken by life. He avoided my gaze, staring at his worn-out shoes as Carol reviewed the documents. "Miss Vance," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "Based on these documents, Mr. Thorne has no assets. His income is below the poverty line. I can't legally enforce a payment plan on someone with no ability to pay. He's declared under penalty of perjury that this is his financial situation." She looked at me over her glasses. "I'm sorry, but my recommendation is to dismiss the claim. You can't get blood from a stone." My throat closed up. I felt the hot sting of tears, but I refused to let them fall. I looked at Julian, who finally met my eyes. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't a look of shame or regret. It was a smirk. A tiny, fleeting, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth. It was a flicker of pure, unadulterated triumph. In that instant, I knew. Every document was a lie. Every word was a performance. He wasn't just a deadbeat, he was a predator, and he was enjoying it. He was watching me drown, and he was proud of the anchor he'd tied to my feet. The mediator's voice faded into a dull buzz. The sterile room felt like a tomb. I had been played, not just for my money, but for my empathy, for my trust, for my love. He had taken everything, and then he had shown up in a costume to dance on the grave of my financial security. As I walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding San Francisco sun, the humiliation was a physical weight. But beneath it, something else was beginning to stir. A cold, quiet cinder of rage. I was broke, I was heartbroken, and I was humiliated. But I wasn't done. The game wasn't over. He had just made the mistake of showing me he was playing one. The weeks that followed were a blur of panic and instant noodles. The eviction notice was no longer a threat, it was a reality taped to my door, its stark red letters a daily monument to my failure. I sold my good camera, my collection of art books, anything that wasn't essential for my work. I was a ghost in my own apartment, the sunny Mission flat now just a box I was about to lose. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, my mind a relentless carousel of debt figures and the ghost of Julian's smirk. One night, deep in the dregs of a caffeine-fueled work session, I found myself doing what every heartbroken person does, scrolling through old photos, a masochistic pilgrimage into the past. My finger hovered over a picture of us in Dolores Park, smiling, happy, oblivious. I felt a fresh wave of sickness and was about to close the app when a notification popped up. Someone had tagged Julian's sister, Chloe, in a photo. Curiosity, dark and toxic, got the better of me. I tapped on it. The photo was from a yacht party. A dozen beautiful people clinking champagne glasses, the sparkling blue water of some exotic coastline behind them. The caption read, "Another perfect day in Monaco." My heart twisted with a bitter, ugly envy. There was Chloe, laughing, her arm around a man whose face was turned away from the camera. I zoomed in, my designer's eye catching a detail on the man's wrist. It was a watch. A Breitling Navitimer, with its distinctive slide rule bezel and chronograph dials. I knew that watch. I had spent a month researching it, saving for it, planning to buy it for Julian's 30th birthday before he'd given me the sob story about needing money for a career-saving certification course instead. It was a limited edition, costing more than my car. And it was on the wrist of the man standing next to Chloe in Monaco. My breath caught in my throat. It could be a coincidence. It had to be. But I couldn't shake it. I saved the image, opened it in Photoshop, and began to work. I sharpened it, adjusted the levels, played with the contrast. The image was grainy, but the details began to emerge. The man's posture, the way he held his glass, the line of his jaw, it was all hauntingly familiar. It was him. It was Julian. He wasn't in Fresno. He was in Monaco, on a yacht, wearing a $30,000 watch, while I was counting loose change to buy coffee. The rage that had been a cinder now roared into a bonfire. This wasn't just a lie, it was a grand, theatrical performance of deception. I started digging. I became a digital archaeologist, excavating the ruins of his online life. His abandoned profiles were a dead end, but his family and friends were not. I created a fake Instagram profile, a generic, pretty girl named Jess, and started following them. I was a phantom, observing from the shadows. I scrolled back months, then years, through the feeds of his cousins, his college buddies, his sister's friends. It was like piecing together a puzzle. A photo here of a lavish dinner at Saison, a background shot there of a sleek, black Audi A8 that I now realized was his. A tagged location at a luxury high-rise in Soma. Piece by piece, a new picture of Julian emerged. Not the struggling analyst from a no-name firm, but a man living a life of obscene wealth. I found the address of the high-rise he'd been tagged at, the Millennium Tower. A place where penthouses sold for tens of millions. On a hunch, I spent $50 I couldn't afford on a private background check service. The results came back in an hour. Julian Thorne. Current address, Millennium Tower, San Francisco. Not Fresno. And his employer, my blood ran cold. It wasn't some small boutique firm. It was Sterling Vance Global. One of the most prestigious, and notoriously ruthless, wealth management firms on the West Coast. A place that managed the fortunes of tech billionaires and old money dynasties. A place where a junior analyst probably made more in a year than I had in my entire life. I felt a dizzying vertigo, like the floor had dropped out from under me. He hadn't just lied about being broke. He had constructed an entirely separate reality, a false identity designed to prey on me. The struggling artist's boyfriend was a character he played. He had used my apartment as a crash pad, my money as pocket change, my love as a temporary convenience. I wasn't a partner, I was a resource to be exploited and discarded. The court case wasn't about him being unable to pay. It was a power play. He had gone to the trouble of faking pay stubs, bank statements, and a letter from his parents, all for the satisfaction of humiliating me, of proving he could get away with it. He wanted to see the look on my face when the world officially declared him a victim and me a fool. I leaned back in my chair, the eviction notice on my door seeming impossibly small in the face of this revelation. The scope of his deception was breathtaking. He wasn't just a liar. He was a sociopath. And he was living a king's life just a few miles away, a life funded, in its earliest stages, by me. The bonfire of my rage was now a white-hot inferno. The goal was no longer to get my money back. The goal was to burn his entire world to the ground. My first move was to become an expert on Sterling Vance Global. I spent days devouring everything I could find about them. Their website was a monument to corporate self-importance, all sleek black and white photos of steely-eyed executives and talk of unwavering integrity and fiduciary duty. Their mission statement was a masterclass in hypocrisy, filled with platitudes about trust and transparency. I read their press releases, their quarterly reports, and, most importantly, their employee code of conduct, which I found buried in the investor relations section of their site. It was a thick, jargon-heavy document, but a few phrases leaped out at me: mandatory disclosure of all personal financial holdings, zero-tolerance policy on conflicts of interest, and immediate termination for any action that brings the firm into disrepute. They were projecting an image of being more ethical than the Pope, which I knew, from my brief foray into the world of high finance, meant they were terrified of regulatory bodies like the SEC. A firm like Sterling Vance didn't just operate on money, it operated on reputation. A single crack in that facade could be catastrophic. I cross-referenced Julian's name with articles in financial journals and industry publications. He wasn't just an analyst, he was a rising star. A 30 Under 30 feature in a local business magazine called him a virtuoso of emerging market derivatives. He was quoted in articles about market trends. He was photographed at charity galas, shaking hands with Silicon Valley CEOs. He was untouchable, a golden boy shielded by the impenetrable walls of corporate power. My $15,000 small claims suit was less than a rounding error on his lunch budget. The power imbalance was staggering. He was a king in his castle, and I was a peasant with a slingshot. Any direct assault would be suicidal. I couldn't just call up his HR department and say my ex-boyfriend scammed me. They'd laugh and hang up. I needed something more. I needed a cannon. The eviction notice arrived in its final, terrifying form. It was a formal, legal document giving me 3 days to vacate the premises. I remember standing in my kitchen, holding the paper, the world shrinking to the 4 walls of the apartment I was about to lose. All my hard work, my late nights, my sacrifices, all of it had been for nothing. I was going to be homeless. I sank to the floor, my back against the cupboards, and for the first time, I let myself cry. Not just for the money or the apartment, but for the person I was before Julian, hopeful, trusting, a little naive. He had poisoned all of it. He had taken my kindness and weaponized it against me. I sat there on the cold linoleum for hours as the sun went down, the room growing dark around me. The city lights began to twinkle outside my window, lights from houses and apartments where normal people lived normal lives. I thought of Julian in his luxury tower, probably looking out at a similar view, feeling nothing. No remorse, no guilt. Just the cold satisfaction of having won. And that's when it happened. The grief, the despair, the fear, it all burned away, leaving behind something hard and pure and cold. It was resolve. It was the quiet, unshakable certainty of a person with nothing left to lose. He thought he had broken me. He thought he had won. But he had made a critical mistake. He hadn't just taken my money and my home. He had taken my fear. I stood up, wiped my eyes, and walked over to my computer. I wasn't a peasant with a slingshot anymore. I was a strategist. And I was going to war. My graphic design skills, my eye for detail, my patience for painstaking work, my ability to create a convincing fiction from pixels and code, were about to become my weapons. He had built a beautiful, glittering empire of lies. I was going to find the single lie that held it all together, and I was going to pull the thread until it all came undone. The first step was to build a ghost. I needed a way to get inside his world, to observe him without being seen. My fake, Jess, profile was too generic. I needed something tailored, something that would appeal to the shallow, brand-obsessed world Julian and his colleagues inhabited. I spent a week creating my masterpiece, Annabelle de Villiers. She was perfect. Her backstory was that she was the daughter of a Swiss hotel magnate, educated in London, now living in San Francisco to explore opportunities in venture capital. Her profile was a curated gallery of quiet luxury. Photos I'd meticulously sourced and photoshopped, a view from a private jet window, a stock photo I altered, A rare book on a marble coffee table, my own book on my roommate's counter, with the lighting adjusted, a glimpse of a vintage Patek Philippe watch peeking from a cashmere sleeve, a composite of 3 different images. Annabelle was sophisticated, wealthy, and just a little bored. She was exactly the kind of person Julian's friends would want to know. I started by following a few high-end art galleries in the city, some Michelin-starred restaurants, and then, a few of Julian's more boastful colleagues. The bait was taken almost immediately. One of them, a guy named Marcus who seemed to exist solely on Instagram, followed Annabelle back within an hour. I had him. I started a slow, patient game. I'd like one of his photos. A week later, I'd comment on another, something brief and cool. Stunning view from the Battery, or love that Brioni suit. I was planting seeds, establishing Annabelle as someone who belonged in their world. It was working. Soon, Marcus was liking Annabelle's photos, even leaving comments. Through him, I got a clear view into Julian's life. They posted pictures from team dinners at Quince, golf trips to Pebble Beach, and late-night drinks at the Redwood Room. Julian was always there, at the center of it all, smiling his charming, predatory smile. I learned his routines, his favorite bars, the names of his inner circle. But it was all circumstantial. Pictures of a lavish lifestyle weren't proof of legal wrongdoing. They were proof of him being a jerk, but that wasn't enough. I needed something concrete, something Sterling Vance couldn't ignore. The breakthrough came from a careless post by Marcus. He uploaded a series of photos from what he called a work retreat in Napa Valley. The last photo in the carousel was a group shot on a boat. Julian was in the back, drink in hand, laughing. It was a beautiful boat, a sleek sailing yacht. And on the transom, just visible if you zoomed in and squinted, was its name, the Serenity. A name. It was the first solid thread I had. I spent the next 48 hours in a rabbit hole of maritime law and vessel registration databases. I learned that most yachts of that size are not owned by individuals but by corporations, often for tax and liability reasons. I started searching for the Serenity in California databases but found nothing. I expanded my search nationwide. Still nothing. On a whim, I started looking into common havens for shell corporations, Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming. And then, the big ones, Panama, the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands. It was a grueling, mind-numbing process. I was cross-referencing LLCs and corporations with names that could be tied to Julian. His initials, his mother's maiden name, his birthday. Nothing. I was about to give up, my eyes burning from staring at the screen, when I tried a different approach. Instead of searching for him, I searched for the boat itself, looking for any holding companies that owned a vessel of that class and name registered in the last few years. It was a long shot. But then, I found it. A hit in the Cayman Islands registry. A yacht named the Serenity was owned by a corporation called JV Holdings. JV Julian Vance. My middle name. The name he'd always hated, the name he'd never used. The name he thought no one would ever look for. My blood turned to ice. It was him. He owned a multi-million-dollar yacht through a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. A man who had stood in a courtroom and sworn under penalty of perjury that he had $112 to his name. This was it. This was the canon. But owning the boat wasn't the crime. The crime was not disclosing it. The crime was what he was likely using the corporation for, hiding assets. His, or more likely, his clients. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that there would be a bank account tied to JV Holdings. Now I just had to find it. But that would require crossing a line, moving from a private investigator to something far more dangerous. It would require me to break the law. And I didn't even hesitate. Finding the shell corporation was one thing, cracking it open was another. The Cayman Islands are not known for their transparency. I had the name of the corporation, JV Holdings, but that was a dead end without more information. There was no public record of its directors or its financial activities. I was at a wall. To get any further, I would need to do something I never imagined I would: hire a hacker. The thought was terrifying. I was venturing into a world I knew nothing about, a world of dark web forums and encrypted messages. I spent a week lurking on cybersecurity message boards, learning the language, understanding the risks. I finally found a user with a long history of positive reviews for financial forensics. I contacted him through an encrypted messaging app, my heart pounding with every keystroke. I kept my request simple and vague. I had the name of a Cayman-based shell corporation. I needed to know what bank it was associated with and, if possible, obtain a recent statement. I didn't say why. I didn't give my real name. He responded with a single word: expensive. He quoted a price that made my stomach clench. It was $5,000. It was almost everything I had left from selling my belongings. It was my moving fund, my security deposit for a new, cheaper apartment. It was my last safety net. I stared at the number on the screen for a long time. This was the point of no return. If this failed, I would have nothing. I would be on the street with nothing but the clothes on my back and a mountain of debt. I thought of Julian's smirk in that courtroom. I thought of his arm around Chloe in Monaco, the Breitling watch flashing in the sun. I thought of the eviction notice. I typed back a single word: deal. The next few days were the most stressful of my life. I sent the money via a series of untraceable cryptocurrency transfers, a process that felt as shady as it sounds. And then, I waited. Every buzz of my phone made me jump. I barely ate. I barely slept. I was consumed by the terrifying possibility that I'd just been scammed out of my last dollars, that this anonymous hacker would take my money and disappear. On the third day, a message finally came through. It wasn't a message, it was a file. A single, encrypted PDF. And a short note: Bank of Nevis International. Account ending in 8842. They're sloppy with their security protocols. This is a one-time snapshot. Don't contact me again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. I downloaded the file, entered the password he'd provided, and held my breath as it opened. It was a bank statement. A real, official-looking statement for JV Holdings from the Bank of Nevis. At the top was the account summary. My eyes scanned past the account number, the address for a P.O. box in Grand Cayman, and landed on the closing balance. $4,217,358.19. $4 million. I felt the air leave my lungs. I had to read it 3 times to believe it. It wasn't just a holding account for the yacht, it was an active slush fund. I scrolled through the transaction history. There were dozens of wire transfers, huge sums of money moving in and out from other anonymous corporations in Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Singapore. It looked exactly like a money laundering operation. He was using this offshore account to hide money, either for himself or for his powerful clients at Sterling Vance. This was the smoking gun. This was more than just a violation of company policy, this was a federal crime. Multiple federal crimes. Wire fraud. Perjury. Tax evasion. Money laundering. He hadn't just built an empire of lies, he had built a criminal enterprise. I felt a strange, terrifying calm settle over me. I had him. I had everything. Now, I just had to build the bomb. I closed the file, my mind already working. This wasn't going to be a quiet exposé. It was going to be a public execution. I wasn't just going to get him fired. I was going to make sure he could never work in finance, or any other legitimate business, ever again. I pulled out a fresh notepad. It was time to design his downfall. The final phase was methodical, almost surgical. I was no longer an emotional wreck seeking vengeance, I was a project manager executing a flawless campaign. My target audience was not Julian, but the senior leadership of Sterling Vance. I knew that men like them responded to only two things, the potential for profit and the threat of catastrophic liability. I was about to hand-deliver the latter. I spent a week assembling what I called the Julian Thorne Compliance and Liability Dossier. My graphic design skills had never been put to better use. This was not going to be a messy stack of papers, it was going to be a professional, undeniable, and terrifying document. I designed a custom cover page with the Sterling Vance logo and the words, "Confidential," for internal review by compliance and senior management only. Every page was clean, with clear headers and concise evidence. The first section was titled, Perjury and Court-Sanctioned Fraud. It contained a high-quality scan of the small claims court filing where he had declared, under penalty of perjury, that his total assets were under $200. Beside it, I placed the bank statement from the Bank of Nevis showing a balance of over $4 million. The contrast was stark and sickening. The second section was, Violation of Employee Code of Conduct, Undisclosed Offshore Holdings. This featured a printout of their own code of conduct, with the relevant sections on asset disclosure highlighted. Next to it, I placed the documentation for the JV Holdings Shell Corporation and its connection to the Serenity yacht. The third section, A Pattern of Deception and Potential Firm Liability, was my masterpiece. It was a timeline. It started with the date he signed the court document, and then followed with a curated selection of the social media photos I had gathered. A date-stamped picture of him in Monaco wearing the $30,000 watch. A photo of him clinking glasses at Saison, where the tasting menu costs $1,000 a person. A picture of him leaning against his Audi A8 in front of the Millennium Tower. Each photo was captioned with a simple, damning fact, 2 days after declaring poverty in court, estimated cost of watch, $30,000, monthly rent for comparable apartment, $12,000. I was painting a picture they couldn't ignore, that one of their star employees was not just a liar, but a reckless, arrogant criminal who had left a digital trail of breadcrumbs a mile long. The final piece was the cover letter. I wrote it not as a scorned ex-girlfriend, but as a concerned, anonymous party. The tone was cold, corporate, and threatening. To the attention of the CEO and head of compliance, it began. Enclosed you will find documents pertaining to one of your senior wealth managers, Mr. Julian Thorne. These documents suggest a pattern of perjury, undisclosed offshore financial activities, and potential violations of SEC regulations. This package has been compiled for your internal review. Please be advised that identical copies of this dossier will be forwarded to the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, in 72 hours. We trust you will take the appropriate and immediate action to mitigate your firm's significant legal and financial exposure. I printed 2 copies of the dossier on heavy, high-quality paper and placed them in thick, professional-looking portfolios. I bought 2 large FedEx envelopes. One was addressed to Mr. Alastair Finch, CEO of Sterling Vance Global. The other was for Ms. Eleanor Vance, no relation, ironically, the firm's notoriously strict head of compliance and a direct descendant of the founding family. I chose my timing carefully. I knew from my research that Sterling Vance held their quarterly board meeting on the last Tuesday of the month. I wanted the packages to arrive that morning, to create maximum chaos. On Monday afternoon, I walked to the FedEx office on Van Ness Avenue. I put on a pair of sunglasses and a baseball cap, feeling like a spy in a cheap movie. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. This was it. The point of no return. I handed the 2 envelopes to the clerk, paid in cash for overnight delivery, and took the receipt. As I walked out of the store and into the cool afternoon air, I didn't feel triumph or joy. I felt a profound and unsettling quiet. The storm was coming. I had aimed the hurricane, and now all I could do was wait for it to make landfall. I didn't have to wait long. The 72-hour deadline I'd given them in the letter was a bluff. I knew a firm like Sterling Vance would act instantly to contain a threat like this. I spent that Tuesday in a fugue state, packing the last of my things into cardboard boxes, unable to focus, my phone clutched in my hand. I expected a call from a lawyer, a threat, something. But there was only silence. The call came on Wednesday evening. The number was blocked. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct told me to. I clicked accept and held the phone to my ear without speaking. "Is this Elara?" The voice was female, quiet and professional. I didn't recognize it. "Who is this?" I asked, my own voice a croak. "You don't know me," she said. "My name is Sarah. I worked with Julian. In the same department." There was a pause. I just wanted to say, "Thank you." I was stunned into silence. She continued, her voice low and hurried, as if she was afraid of being overheard. "Nobody here liked him. He was arrogant, he stole clients, he took credit for other people's work. He was a cancer in this office. Yesterday morning, it was insane. Eleanor Vance pulled him out of the board meeting herself. We could hear her shouting from down the hall. 30 minutes later, security came. They walked him to his desk, gave him a box, and escorted him out of the building. His accounts are frozen, his licenses are under review, they fired him on the spot for gross misconduct. Everyone knows the feds are coming next. He's finished." I couldn't form words. I just listened as this stranger, this anonymous ally, described the total and complete implosion of Julian's life. She told me he was crying as security walked him past her desk. "Crying. I don't know how you did it," she whispered. "But you did what none of us had the courage to do. You exposed him. So, thank you." And then she hung up. I lowered the phone, a single, silent tear tracing a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or even joy. It was a tear of sheer, unadulterated release. It was the feeling of a 2-year-old weight finally being lifted from my soul. A few weeks later, I got a letter from a law firm representing Sterling Vance. It was a settlement offer. They had recovered a sum of money from Mr. Thorne's accounts during their internal audit. Without admitting any liability, they were prepared to offer me $25,000 in exchange for my signing a non-disclosure agreement. It was hush money. A way to ensure I wouldn't become a problem during the inevitable federal investigation. $15,000 to cover what he stole, and $10,000 for my silence. I signed the papers, took the money, and never looked back. I left San Francisco. I moved to Portland, started fresh. I built a new life, a quiet life, a life where I trusted slowly and carefully. I paid off my debts, rebuilt my credit, and slowly, painstakingly, rebuilt myself. I had a new apartment, new clients, new friends. the ghost of Julian Thorne rarely visited. But sometimes, late at night, I would think about the look on his face in that mediation room, that smug, triumphant smirk. And I would feel a cold, quiet satisfaction. He thought he was playing chess, but he never realized he was playing against a grandmaster. He saw me as a pawn to be sacrificed. He never saw the queen. Then, about a year after I moved, I was sitting in a small coffee shop in the Pearl District, sketching in my notebook. My phone buzzed with a news alert. It was from a major financial publication. The headline read, "Former Sterling Vance, whiz kid, Julian Thorne indicted in multi-million-dollar fraud and money laundering scheme." The article included a photo. It was a press photo of Julian, haggard and pale, in a cheap, rumpled suit, being led out of a federal courthouse in handcuffs. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a hollow, terrified emptiness in his eyes. He looked broken. He looked like the man he pretended to be in that courtroom a lifetime ago. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but they never tell you how quiet the world gets after you've served it. The end.